The war had ended, but Warsaw still smelled of smoke. It was the autumn of 1945 when a man named Kazimierz Nowak returned to what was left of the old postal station on Zalazna Street. He had worked there once, before the ghetto walls went up, before the world turned inside out. Now he came back not as a postman, but as a ghost visiting his own past. The building was barely standing. 3 walls remained, charred and hollow. The roof had collapsed inward, leaving a mountain of broken timber, shattered tiles, and twisted metal. Kazimierz didn't know what he was looking for. Perhaps a piece of his old life. Perhaps nothing at all. He climbed carefully over the debris, his boots crunching on glass and plaster. The sorting room where he once worked was buried beneath layers of destruction. But something caught his eye, a corner of the floor that hadn't fully caved in. A metal sorting cabinet, bent and blackened, lay on its side. He pulled at it. The hinges groaned. And then he saw them. 47 small envelopes, bound together with string that had somehow survived. They were stained with soot and water, but intact. Sealed. Never delivered. Kazimierz's hands trembled as he untied the string. He opened the first envelope carefully, as if it might crumble at his touch. The handwriting was a child's, careful, uncertain letters that slanted to the right. The ink had faded to a pale brown, but the words were still readable. Dear Uncle Merrick, I hope this letter finds you well. Mama says you are safe in America. I want to tell you about my cat, Puzek. He is very brave. The letter ended abruptly. No signature. No date. Just silence where a child's voice had stopped. Kazimierz sat down among the ruins and read another. And another. Each one a small window into a world that no longer existed. Children writing to relatives they would never see again. Children describing hunger without fully understanding it. Children asking when they could go back to school, when the walls would come down, when things would be normal again. Some letters were written in Polish, some in Yiddish, a few in broken German. But all of them carried the same weight. The weight of hope written in a place where hope was forbidden. The children wrote about small things. A lost toy, a birthday wish, a funny thing their little brother said. They wrote about big things too, but always carefully, as if they knew someone might be watching. They wrote in code only a child could create, where the bad weather meant hunger, where the tall fence meant the ghetto walls, where, when spring comes, meant freedom that never arrived. One letter was written in pencil so light, it was almost invisible. A girl named Rutka wrote to her grandmother, I practice my violin every day, even though I have no violin anymore. I play it in my mind. Papa says memory is stronger than walls. Another, from a boy who signed only as D, asked his aunt, Do you remember teaching me to swim? I think about water all the time now. Clean water. I dream I am swimming to you, all the way across the ocean. Kazimierz realized these letters had been collected, perhaps by ghetto residents who believed the postal service might resume someday. Someone had kept them safe, hidden them, preserved them with the faith that words could outlive walls, that voices could survive silence. But the letters never left. They sat in that cabinet through the deportations, through the uprising, through the final destruction of the ghetto. They waited while the children who wrote them disappeared into trains that went east, into camps whose names would become synonyms for darkness. 47 letters, 47 voices, each one a child who had something to say to the world, but the world wasn't listening. Kazimierz gathered them carefully and brought them to the Jewish Historical Institute that was just beginning to document what had been lost. The scholars there read them in silence, tears falling onto pages that had already survived fire and rain. They recognized immediately what they held. Not just historical documents, but something far more precious. These were the last words of childhood itself in a place where childhood had been murdered. The letters became part of a growing archive of voices from the abyss. But unlike the diaries and testimonies written by adults who understood what was happening, these letters carried a different kind of truth. They showed innocence trying to survive in a world designed to destroy it. They showed children holding on to ordinary dreams in extraordinary darkness. And they showed something else, too. They showed that even when everything was taken, homes, families, futures, some children still believed their words mattered. That someone, somewhere, would want to hear from them. That their small voices deserved to be heard. Among ashes and shattered glass, someone found 47 small envelopes, written by hands that would never write again. But now, Decades later, we can read them. We can hear them. And we can remember that every letter was written by a child who believed, even in the darkest place, that their story was worth telling. These are their stories. These are their voices. This is what they wanted us to know. Before the letters stopped coming, they told stories of a world that shouldn't have existed. The ghetto was a place where childhood tried to survive in a space designed to suffocate it. In Warsaw, over 400,000 people were crammed into an area barely large enough for 50,000. In Lodz, families of 8 or 10 shared single rooms with no running water. The streets were so crowded you could barely walk without stepping over someone sleeping on the pavement, or worse, someone who would never wake up again. But children, somehow, still tried to be children. One of the earliest letters in the bundle was written by a boy named Jakub. It was dated September 1940, just months after the walls went up. His handwriting was neat, proud even. You could tell he'd been practicing. Dear Cousin Anya, today I saw 3 cats fighting over a piece of bread. It was very funny. The smallest cat won. I named him General because he is so brave. School is different now. We learn in Mrs. Goldberg's apartment. There are 22 of us, but only 10 chairs, so we take turns sitting. I don't mind standing. I can see the blackboard better that way. How is your school? Do you still have desks? At first, the letters carried this kind of lightness. Children wrote about games they invented, friends they made, small victories in a shrinking world. They wrote about finding a marble in the street, about a funny thing someone said, about a cat. Always the cats. The ghetto was full of abandoned cats, and children loved them because cats, at least, were still free to climb walls. But reality pressed in from every side. Food became the center of everything. The official ration was less than 200 calories a day, barely enough to keep a body breathing, let alone growing. Children learned hunger as a constant companion. Not the hunger of a missed meal, but hunger that hollowed you out, that made your bones ache, that turned food into an obsession more powerful than any childhood dream. A girl named Esther wrote in early 1941, "Mama gave me an extra piece of bread today because it's my birthday." It was this big, and here she had drawn a small rectangle with careful pencil lines, measuring it precisely, as if documenting something sacred. I ate it very slowly. I made it last 17 minutes. I counted. The children became old in ways children shouldn't. They learned to recognize the sounds of danger, boots on cobblestones, shouting in German, the rattle of trucks that came to take people away. They learned to read their parents' faces for signs of fear. They learned which streets to avoid, which walls had gaps where you might slip through, which shops still had food if you had something to trade. Some became smugglers. Small bodies could fit through holes that adults couldn't. Children as young as 6 or 7 would slip out of the ghetto through sewers or broken walls, risking their lives to bring back a loaf of bread, a few potatoes, anything. They moved through the city like shadows, hunted by guards on both sides of the wall. A boy who signed his letter only with the initial M wrote, "I went on an adventure today. That's what Papa calls it when I go to the other side. I brought back eggs. 6 eggs. I felt like a king carrying treasure. But on the way back, I heard shooting. I had to hide in a cellar for 2 hours. I was so scared I would break the eggs. When I got home, Mama cried. Not because of the eggs, because of me. But we ate well tonight. Play was forbidden, but children played anyway. They played quietly, in courtyards hidden from the street, in attics, in cellars. They made toys from wire and scraps of cloth. They drew pictures in the dirt. They sang songs, but softly, always softly, because loud joy was dangerous. Joy meant you had something left to lose. Secret schools operated throughout the ghetto. Education was officially prohibited, but teachers gathered children in apartments, in abandoned shops, in basements. They taught with no books, no paper, no supplies. They taught from memory. History, mathematics, literature, subjects that seemed absurd in a place where tomorrow was never guaranteed. But the teachers insisted. Learning meant the future still existed. Learning meant resistance. A girl named Zofia wrote about her secret school. Today we learned about birds. Mrs. Weinberg described how storks fly to Africa every winter. She said they fly thousands of miles. I asked if they could carry letters. Everyone laughed, but I was serious. If I could tie a letter to a stork, where would it go? Would it find you? Would it fly somewhere safe? As months became years, the letters changed. The playful tone faded like color draining from a photograph. The children stopped asking when things would return to normal because they were forgetting what normal meant. A boy named David wrote in 1942, "I can't remember what chocolate tastes like anymore. I know I loved it once, but the memory is gone. It's like trying to remember a dream. Uncle Joseph, if you still have chocolate where you are, eat some for me. Then write and tell me what it was like. Maybe that will help me remember." The letters began to mention things that should never be in children's writing. Lists of people who disappeared, descriptions of the resettlement trains, questions about what happened to friends who were taken away. The innocence didn't vanish all at once. It bled out slowly, word by word, letter by letter. But even in the darkest letters, there were flashes of something stubborn and bright. Imagination that refused to die, hope that persisted for no logical reason. A girl named Rena wrote near the end, "At night, I imagine I can fly. I rise up over the walls, over the city, over everything. I fly so high I can see the ocean. I fly until I find a place where children are still allowed to laugh out loud. Maybe that place is where you are. Maybe that's where all the letters go, to the place where laughing is allowed." The ghetto was a world where childhood and horror lived side by side, where a child could write about a funny cat in the morning and witness death in the afternoon, where imagination became both escape and survival. And through it all, these children kept writing, kept believing their words mattered, kept holding on to the idea that someone, somewhere, was listening. Every letter had a voice, and every voice had a name. Let me introduce you to some of them. The children who believed their words could reach beyond the walls. Hania was 9 years old when she wrote her first letter. You could tell she was 9 because she drew little flowers in the margins, and she spelled tomorrow 3 different ways in the same paragraph. She was writing to her aunt in Krakow, though whether her aunt ever received any letters, we'll never know. "Dear Aunt Mala, I miss your garden very much. Do the roses still bloom in summer? I remember they were pink and yellow. We don't have flowers here, but yesterday I found a dandelion growing between 2 stones in the courtyard. I didn't pick it. I visit it every day to make sure it's still there. It's my friend now. Is that silly? Mama says I can make friends with anything." Hania wrote 4 letters in total. In each one, she mentioned something beautiful she'd found: a piece of colored glass, a bird's feather, a button that sparkled. She was collecting beauty in a place designed to contain only ugliness. In her last letter, written in cramped handwriting that suggested paper had become scarce, she wrote, "The dandelion turned into white fluff and blew away. I made a wish on it like you taught me. I wished for enough bread for everyone. Was that a good wish? I hope the seeds land somewhere nice." Merrick was 11, and he wanted you to know he was smart. His letters were full of facts, observations, calculations. He was the kind of boy who counted things because numbers made sense when nothing else did. "Dear Uncle Bronek, today I calculated how many bricks are in the wall on Lesno Street. I counted one section, 312 bricks, then measured how long that section was, then measured the whole wall. I estimate 47,000 bricks total. That's a lot of bricks to keep people in. Or out. I'm not sure which. Maybe both." Merrick wrote about the economics of the ghetto with the seriousness of a scholar. He documented prices, rations, the black market exchange rates. In one letter, he created a detailed chart showing how much food a family of 4 needed versus what they actually received. At the bottom, he wrote, "The math doesn't work. We shouldn't be alive. But we are. There must be variables I'm not accounting for." His letters showed a child trying to understand the incomprehensible through logic, as if enough data could make sense of madness. In his final letter, the precision cracked. "Uncle, I've been calculating something else. How much does a human life weigh? Not in kilograms, in value. The Germans act like we weigh nothing. But Mama says every life is infinite. Can something be both 0 and infinite at the same time? This is a math problem I cannot solve." Loka was 13, right at that age between childhood and something else. Her letters were the longest, the most literary. She wrote like someone who'd been reading novels and wanted to become a character in a better story. "Dearest cousin Rachel, I've decided to become a writer when this is all over. I will write about everything I've seen, but I'll make it beautiful somehow. Is that wrong? To want to make beauty from this?" Mrs. Kaminska says that's what artists do. They transform pain into something that helps people understand. I don't know if I understand anything yet, but I'm practicing. Loka wrote descriptions of people she observed, The way Mrs. Abramovitz hummed while darning socks. How Mr. Levy told the same joke every day, and people still laughed because laughter was rare enough to be precious. She wrote character sketches, tiny stories about ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because they were normal in an abnormal place. There's a boy in our building named Samuel. He's 7. Every morning, he stands by the gate and salutes the adults going to work, like he's a soldier sending troops into battle. It makes people smile. That's his job now, making people smile. Is that not as important as any other work? But Lilka also wrote about darker things, and she wrote about them with startling clarity. I saw a woman collapse on the street today. People stepped around her like she was a puddle. Not because they don't care, because they've seen it too many times. Because caring about everything means you can't survive anything. I hate that I'm learning this. I hate that I understand it. In her last letter, Lilka wrote something that could have been poetry. Rachel, I'm forgetting colors. I know what they're called, but I can't quite picture them anymore. Everything here is gray and brown and the yellow of the stars we wear. When you see something bright, a red dress, a blue sky, will you look at it twice for me? Will you remember it hard enough for both of us? There was a boy named Simon who was 10 and obsessed with airplanes. Before the war, he'd collected pictures of aircraft, memorized their specifications, dreamed of becoming a pilot. In the ghetto, he still drew planes in the margins of his letters, detailed sketches with measurements and annotations. Uncle Henrik, I saw a plane today. High up, so high it looked like a silver bird. I think it was a Messerschmitt Bf 109, but I couldn't see clearly enough. I watched it until it disappeared. I imagined I was inside, flying away. Do you think they can see us from up there? Do we look like ants? Or do we look like people? Simon's letters always included technical details about planes, as if by maintaining his expertise, he could maintain his identity. He was not just a ghetto child. He was a boy who knew the wingspan of a Spitfire, the top speed of a P-51 Mustang, the ceiling height of a B-17. When I get out of here, I'm still going to fly. I practice every night. I close my eyes and imagine the controls, the engine sound, the feeling of lifting off the ground. Papa says imagination is practice for the future. So I'm practicing. Every single night. A girl named Miriam was only 7, and her letters were heartbreaking in their simplicity. Dear Grandma, are you still making cookies? I remember the ones with jam inside. I remember eating them warm. I told Mama about them, and she cried. I didn't mean to make her sad. I just wanted to remember. Is it okay to remember? Such a small question. Such an enormous weight behind it. These children wrote not to complain, but to remain human. In a place designed to strip away identity, to reduce people to numbers and categories, they insisted on their names, their thoughts, their individual souls. They wrote with humor when they could find it. Merrick made jokes about the terrible soup. I think I found a personality in today's batch. It was very bitter. Hania described a cat who walks like he owns the whole ghetto, which is funny because who would want to own this place? They wrote with hope that had no logical foundation. Lilka, when we're free, and we will be free, Rachel, I have to believe that. I'm going to sleep for a week. Then I'm going to eat until I'm full. Then I'm going to read every book I've missed. They wrote with longing so deep it ached through the decades. Simon, I miss running. Just running for no reason. Running because you can. Running until you're tired and then stopping because you want to, not because someone made you. They wrote with confusion that no child should have to articulate. Miriam, Mama says God is watching over us. But if God is watching, why doesn't he do something? Is he too far away to see clearly? Is he sleeping? Papa got angry when I asked this. But Grandma, I really want to know. Each letter was an act of faith. Faith that their words mattered, that someone would care, that their lives were worth documenting. They wrote themselves into existence, line by line, letter by letter. And now, all these years later, we can hear them. We can know their names. We can understand that Hania loved flowers, that Merrick loved numbers, that Lilka wanted to be a writer, that Simon dreamed of flying, that Miriam just wanted to remember cookies without making her mother cry. They were not just victims. They were people, distinct, complicated, individual people. And they wanted us to know them, not as statistics, not as symbols, as themselves. The letters weren't supposed to exist at all. Official mail service within the ghetto had been severed almost immediately. Contact with the outside world was forbidden, punishable by death. The Nazis understood that isolation was a weapon. Cut the connections, sever the threads, and people become easier to control, easier to erase. But there were those who refused to be silenced. In a basement beneath a building on Nowa Lipki Street in Warsaw, a group of people created something extraordinary. A secret post office that operated in defiance of every law designed to destroy them. The man who started it was named Avram Kessler. Before the war, he'd been a postal clerk, spent 20 years sorting letters, learning routes, understanding the invisible network that connected people across distances. When the ghetto walls went up, Avram couldn't accept that all those connections would simply end. He began small. A letter smuggled out through a Polish worker who still had passage rights. Another carried by a Jewish policeman who had family on the Aryan side. Word spread quietly, carefully. If you had a letter, if you needed to reach someone beyond the walls, you went to Avram. The basement became his sorting room. It was accessed through a false panel in a storage closet, down a narrow staircase that smelled of earth and mildew. The ceiling was so low you had to hunch. There was one table, 2 chairs, a lamp that ran on stolen electricity. On the walls, Avram had recreated a map of postal routes. Not the German-controlled ones, but a secret network of couriers, safe houses, and sympathetic souls who would carry words across forbidden borders. Every letter is an act of resistance, Avram would say. Every word that escapes these walls is proof we still exist. The operation was remarkable in its complexity. Letters arrived to Avram through whispered recommendations. Children brought them, folded small and hidden in pockets. Adults delivered them wrapped in newspaper, concealed in false-bottomed baskets, sewn into coat linings. Avram organized them by destination, by urgency, by the availability of couriers. He had contacts among the resistance groups, the Jewish Fighting Organization, the Polish Home Army, individuals who moved between worlds and risked everything to carry these scraps of paper. Some couriers were teenagers who looked Aryan enough to pass. Blue eyes, light hair, flawless Polish. They carried letters in their shoes, in hollowed-out books, in the false bottoms of market baskets. One young woman named Irina would sew letters into the lining of her coat, up to 30 at a time, and walk through checkpoints with her heart pounding so hard she was certain the guards could hear it. Others used the sewers. The ghetto was crisscrossed by an underground network of passages, tunnels that connected to the city beyond. Couriers would wade through darkness and filth, letters sealed in waterproof pouches, praying the passages hadn't been discovered, hadn't been sealed, hadn't become tombs. The price of capture was immediate execution. Everyone knew this. They did it anyway. In the basement, Avram kept a second collection, letters that couldn't be delivered. These were addressed to people who'd already been deported, to addresses in towns that no longer existed, to relatives whose fates were unknown. Avram couldn't bring himself to destroy them. Instead, he stored them carefully, organized by date, as if someday the world would be restored and these words could finally reach their destinations. This is where the 47 letters were found, among Avram's kept collection. Letters written by children to family members who may have already been dead. Letters that arrived too late, or couldn't find couriers willing to risk the route. Letters that Avram preserved because he believed, had to believe, that someone, eventually, would want to hear these voices. Children often came to the basement themselves. They'd heard whispers about the place where letters could escape. They'd arrive with their envelopes clutched tight, eyes wide in the dim lamplight, and Avram would receive each one with the same solemn ceremony. "Where's this going?" he'd ask. "To my uncle in America." "And what does it say?" "That I'm okay, that we're managing, that he shouldn't worry." Avram would nod, knowing the letter might never arrive, knowing the child was probably not okay, that they were not managing. That worry was the only reasonable response. But he'd add it to his collection anyway, because hope required action, even futile action. One girl, it might have been Lilka or someone like her, asked Avram, "Do you think they'll receive it?" Truly. And Avram, who'd been lying to give people hope for months, who'd sent letters into voids and watched families cling to the possibility of connection, told her the truth. "I don't know. But I know it matters that you wrote it." That matters absolutely. The basement operation lasted almost 2 years. Avram and his small team of volunteers processed hundreds of letters, maybe thousands. Some made it out. Some reached their destinations. Occasionally, impossibly, a reply would come back, smuggled through the same dangerous channels, and Avram would deliver it like it was made of light itself. But the Nazis were always hunting for resistance networks. Informers, interrogations, systematic searches. Eventually, they found everything hidden in the ghetto. In July 1942, during the mass deportations, Avram disappeared. His assistants arrived at the building to find the basement entrance exposed, the false panel torn away. The table was overturned. The postal map had been ripped from the walls. But the letters, the undeliverable ones, the collection Avram had kept, were still there, stuffed hastily into a metal sorting cabinet, as if in his final moments, Avram had tried to hide them one last time. No one knows what happened to him. Perhaps he was shot on the spot. Perhaps he was loaded onto one of the trains that went to Treblinka. Perhaps he tried to explain that he was just a postman, just doing what postmen do, connecting people, carrying words, maintaining the threads that make us human. The basement was abandoned after that. Too dangerous. Too exposed. But someone, maybe one of Avram's volunteers, maybe just a person who understood what those letters represented, moved the metal cabinet to the post office on Zalazna Street. Hid it there. Hoped it would survive what human beings could not. And somehow, impossibly, it did. The building was destroyed. The ghetto was liquidated. The children who wrote those letters were murdered. Avram and his network of couriers were scattered to death and oblivion. But the letters remained. Sealed, preserved, waiting in the darkness for someone to find them. 47 voices that Avram Kessler tried to send into the world. 47 acts of resistance, stored carefully by a postman who believed that even undelivered letters had value, that even words that never reached their destination still mattered, because they were written, because they were true, because they insisted, against all evidence, that connection was possible, that we could still reach each other, even across walls, even across death, even across the enormous distance between then and now. Avram Kessler, wherever you are, your post office worked. The letters made it through. Just not in the way any of us expected. When you read all 47 letters together, patterns emerge, not because the children coordinated their words, but because certain hungers are universal. Certain losses speak in the same language, even across different voices. Let me show you what they wrote about. What mattered most in those final words. The children wrote about futures they could barely imagine but refused to abandon. Merrick, the boy who loved numbers, wrote, "Uncle Bronek, when I finish school, real school, not the secret kind, I want to study engineering. I want to build bridges, not walls. Bridges that connect places. I've been thinking about this a lot. Walls divide, but bridges choose to join. When this is over, the world will need people who know how to build bridges. I want to be one of them." He was 11 years old, living in a place designed to ensure he'd never reach 12. But he planned for university, for a career, for a future where his choice of profession would matter. Lilka wrote about becoming a writer, but also about smaller dreams. "Rachel, when we're together again, can we go to a cafe? A real one, with little tables and waiters in white aprons? I dream about sitting in a cafe, ordering coffee. I've never even tasted coffee, but I dream about it. And just talking for hours about nothing important. About books we've read. About boys, maybe. About what dress you're wearing. Normal things. Boring things. Beautiful, boring, normal things." The mundane had become sacred. The ordinary had become fantastical. Simon, who dreamed of flying, wrote, "Uncle Henrik, I've decided which plane I want to learn on. A trainer, probably a Piper Cub. They're small and forgiving. Good for beginners. After I master that, I'll move to fighters. Maybe I'll join the Air Force. Maybe I'll be a commercial pilot and fly people to places they've always wanted to see. Wouldn't that be something? To help people reach their dreams? That could be my job, dream delivery." Dream delivery. From a child in a ghetto who'd likely never been on a plane, who wrote this while hungry, while cold, while watching people die in the streets. But still, dream delivery. They wrote about food the way poets write about love. Esther, who'd carefully measured her birthday bread, devoted an entire letter to the memory of a single meal. "Aunt Devora, I need you to help me remember. Before the ghetto, Mama made cholent every Friday. I remember the smell, but I'm forgetting the taste. Can you describe it? I know there were beans and potatoes and meat. We had meat then, can you imagine? But how did it taste exactly? Was it salty? Sweet? I'm afraid if I don't remember correctly, I'll lose it forever. Please write back and tell me about Cholet. Every detail. I need to remember. Food became literature, memory, identity. They cataloged meals from before the way scholars catalog artifacts from lost civilizations. A boy named Yosef wrote what could only be called a fantasy. Dear cousin, last night I dreamed about Passover at Bub's house. The table was full, roasted chicken, potato kugel, carrot simis, that cake with the almonds. I could smell everything. In the dream, Bub kept saying, eat, eat, you're too thin, and piling food on my plate. I ate and never got full. It was the best dream I've ever had. When I woke up, I was crying. Not because I was sad. Because for those few minutes, I wasn't hungry. Do you know how precious that is? To not be hungry, even in a dream? Hania, the 9-year-old who collected beautiful things, wrote, Aunt Mala, I saw an orange today. A real orange. A man was selling them. I don't know how he got them. And I just stood and stared. I haven't seen an orange in so long. It was so bright it almost hurt to look at. Like a little sun sitting in his hand. He wanted 500 zloty for it. We don't have 500 zloty. We don't have 50 zloty. But I looked at that orange for 10 whole minutes and tried to memorize it. The color, the dimpled skin, the way it seemed to glow. When I got home, I drew it from memory. I'm sending you the drawing. Is it right? Does it look like an orange? I can't quite remember anymore. They wrote about people who were disappearing. Miriam, the 7-year-old, wrote about her father. Grandma, Papa went away on a train. Mama said he went to work in a labor camp and he'll come back when the war is over. But I heard her crying at night. She thought I was asleep, but I wasn't. I wanted to ask her why she was crying if Papa is just working, but I was afraid of the answer. Grandma, do you think Papa is okay? Mama won't tell me the truth. But maybe you will. I'm old enough. I'm 7.5 now. Old enough for truth. Not old enough to understand it. A girl named Rachel, not the cousin Lilka wrote to, but another Rachel, described her sister's disappearance with devastating clarity. Aunt Sarah, they came for the children last week. Anyone under 10 who wasn't working. Mama hid my little sister Chana in a cupboard, but she was scared and she cried out. They found her. They took her. She was holding her doll, the one with the blue dress you made her. She looked back at us as they carried her away and she said, Mama, I'll be good. I promise I'll be good. Like she thought she was being punished. Like she thought if she was good enough, they'd bring her back. Aunt Sarah, Chana was 5 years old. What could she possibly have done to deserve this? What could any of us have done? Marek wrote about his grandfather with the precision that characterized all his letters. Uncle Bronek, grandfather died yesterday at 4:17 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because I was holding his hand and watching the clock. He was 68 years old. He died of starvation, though the official cause will be listed as heart failure because that sounds better. Before he died, he made me promise to survive. He said, someone has to remember. Someone has to tell them what happened here. I promised. But uncle, I'm 11 years old. How do I carry a responsibility that heavy? They asked the questions adults were too afraid to voice. A boy named David wrote, Rabbi uncle, we still pray. Every morning, Papa wraps his tefillin. They're worn now. The leather is cracking, and we pray. But I need to ask you something. We pray, blessed are you, Lord, who brings forth bread from the earth. But there is no bread. We pray, who has kept us alive and sustained us. But people are dying every day. Are we lying when we pray these things? Is God listening? And if he is listening, why doesn't he answer? Miriam asked her grandmother, do you think God can see through walls? The walls are very high. Maybe he can only see people who are outside. Maybe he doesn't know we're here. Should we shout louder when we pray? Would that help? But some letters showed faith that had calcified into something harder than belief, a kind of defiant hope. Lilka wrote, Rachel, Mrs. Kaminska says that God doesn't cause suffering, people do. She says God gave us free will, and these are the consequences when people choose evil. I want to believe her. I want to believe there's a reason that doesn't involve God abandoning us. But it's hard. It's so hard to have faith when faith is the only thing we have left. And Simon, the boy who dreamed of flying, wrote something that could have been a prayer. Uncle Henrik, I think God is like the sky. Always there, even when you can't see it. Sometimes clouds cover it. Sometimes it's night. But the sky doesn't disappear just because you can't see it. Maybe God is like that. Maybe he's still there, behind all this darkness. I have to believe that. Because if the sky is gone, then what are pilots supposed to fly toward? But of all the letters, one haunts me most. It was written by a girl who signed herself only as S. The handwriting was rushed, the paper torn at one corner. It began normally enough. Dear Aunt, I hope this reaches you. They say we're being resettled tomorrow. Mama is packing what we can carry. It's not much. I'm bringing your photograph, the one from the beach, remember? You're laughing in it. I look at it every night before I sleep. I want to tell you about something that happened yesterday. There was a butterfly in the courtyard. I don't know how it got inside the walls, but there it was, yellow and black, fluttering around like it didn't know where it was. Everyone stopped to watch it. For maybe 3 minutes, we all just stood there watching a butterfly. It was the most beautiful thing I've seen in. And there the letter ends. Mid-sentence. Mid-thought. Mid-beauty. The pen had dragged slightly, as if she'd been interrupted. As if someone had called her name. As if time, which she thought she still had run out. The most beautiful thing I've seen in what? In months? In years? In her whole life? We'll never know. The butterfly flew through her words and disappeared, taking the end of her sentence with it. Taking everything with it. These were the themes of their letters. Dreams and hunger. Family and faith. The ordinary elevated to the sacred. The sacred reduced to questions without answers. They wrote about what they'd lost and what they still hoped to find. They wrote about love in a place built on hate. They wrote about tomorrow in a place designed to have no tomorrow. And in their words, hopeful, resigned, poetic, desperate, defiant, they showed us what it means to remain human when the world insists you're not. To keep dreaming when dreams are forbidden. To keep loving when loss is certain. To keep writing, even when the sentence will never be finished. Even when the butterfly flies away before you can describe it. Even then. After August 1942, no more letters were sent. Not because the children stopped writing. Not because they stopped hoping. But because there was no one left to write. The deportations began in summer, during what the Nazis called the Great Action. It was a term designed to obscure the truth that they were emptying the Warsaw Ghetto, 6,000 people per day, loading them into cattle cars that went east to a place called Treblinka. The children didn't know what Treblinka was. Neither did most adults. The Germans called it a resettlement camp, a place where Jews would work in labor battalions, where families would be reunited, where conditions would be better than the overcrowded ghetto. They announced it through loudspeakers, through notices posted on walls. They even offered bribes, 3 kilograms of bread and 1 kilogram of marmalade, to anyone who reported voluntarily for a resettlement. Some people believed it because they wanted to, because hope, even false hope, was easier than truth. But whispers spread. Rumors from the few who'd escaped and made it back. Stories that didn't make sense, about showers that weren't showers, about gas, about mass graves in the forest. Most people couldn't comprehend it. The human mind isn't built to accept the impossible, even when the impossible is happening. The children wrote letters about the deportations with confusion and fear, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. One letter, dated late July, said simply, "They're taking us tomorrow. Mama says to pack light. I don't understand where we're going or why, but she says it will be all right. I hope she's right. I hope you get this. I hope." Another child wrote, "The trains are so crowded. I saw them loading people yesterday. So many people in one car. How will they all fit? How will they breathe? Uncle, if you hear where they're sending us, will you write? Will you come find us there?" The operation was methodical, efficient, industrial. The Germans and their collaborators surrounded blocks of the ghetto, building by building, street by street. They pulled people from their homes, from their hiding places. Those who resisted were shot on the spot. The rest were marched to the Umschlagplatz, the collection point, where they waited in the summer heat, sometimes for days, without water, without food, until the trains came. Avram Kessler, the postman who ran the secret post office, was likely taken during this period. Perhaps he tried to save his letters, stuffing them into the metal cabinet one last time, hoping someone would find them, hoping the words would outlast the voices. The children who'd written those letters, Hania with her dandelion, Merrick with his calculations, Lilka with her dreams of cafes, Simon who wanted to fly, Miriam who asked if God could see through walls, they were all swept up in the same tide of deportation. Imagine them in those cattle cars. 80, sometimes 100 people in a space meant for 40. Standing room only, pressed together so tightly they couldn't fall even if they fainted. The door sealed shut. Darkness. The smell of fear and sweat and human waste. The train moving slowly east, stopping sometimes for hours on empty tracks. The heat inside building to unbearable levels. Children crying for water, for air, for their parents, for someone to explain what was happening. The journey took hours, sometimes a full day. People died standing up during the transport. Others went mad. But most just endured, because what else could they do? They held on to hope because the alternative was unthinkable. Treblinka was not a labor camp. It was a death factory. The trains arrived at a platform disguised to look like a regular station. There was a fake clock on a fake building. Signs pointing to different tracks, to different cities. Warsaw, Białystok, Włocławek. As if this was a place where journeys continued, where destinations still mattered. The children were told they were going to shower and be decontaminated before continuing to the work camps. They were ordered to undress, to remember where they left their belongings so they could retrieve them afterward. Some believed it. Others knew. But what could they do? Where could they run? The camp was surrounded by guards, by dogs, by death. They were herded into chambers disguised as shower rooms. The doors were sealed. Carbon monoxide from tank engines was pumped in. It took about 20 minutes for everyone inside to die. The bodies were removed and burned. The belongings were sorted: clothes, shoes, glasses, toys. Everything was cataloged, recycled, sent back to Germany for use by Aryan families. Nothing was wasted except the lives themselves. 800,000 people were murdered at Treblinka. Most of them arrived from the Warsaw Ghetto. Many of them were children. Hania, who found beauty in dandelions. Marek, who counted bricks and built bridges in his mind. Lilka, who wanted to write stories and drink coffee in cafes. Simon, who practiced flying every night in his dreams. Miriam, who asked if it was okay to remember. Esther, who measured her birthday bread in minutes. Yosef, who dreamed of Cholent and woke up crying. Rachel, whose sister was taken for being too young. David, who asked if they were lying when they prayed. And the girl named S, who never finished describing the butterfly. All of them, gone. Not over months or years. Over hours. In the time it takes to watch a movie, to eat a meal, to write a letter, they ceased to exist. By October 1942, the Warsaw Ghetto had been reduced from nearly 500,000 people to barely 60,000. The streets that had been impossibly crowded were now empty. Buildings stood hollow. The secret schools were abandoned. The underground post office was silent. The letters stopped coming because there was no one left to write them. The deportations continued, slower now, picking off the remaining workers, the people in hiding, the ones who'd somehow survived the initial sweeps. In April 1943, the remaining Jews in the ghetto rose up in armed revolt, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. They fought with smuggled weapons, with homemade bombs, with the fury of people who had nothing left to lose. They held out for nearly a month. But the outcome was never in doubt. The Germans burned the ghetto block by block, building by building, until there was nothing left but rubble and ash. The postal station on Zalazna Street was destroyed in the fighting or the fires that followed. The metal cabinet containing 47 letters was buried under debris, hidden in the ruins, waiting. The words remained, but the children vanished. This is the cruelest mathematics of genocide. Words can survive in ways people cannot. Paper and ink outlasted flesh and blood. The letters continued to exist, silent, sealed, waiting in darkness, while the voices that created them were erased from the world. Think about that silence. The absolute, final silence that fell over the ghetto after August 1942. No more children asking questions. No more dreams written in careful handwriting. No more letters hidden in coat linings, carried through sewers, smuggled across walls. No more Avram Kessler organizing deliveries that might never arrive. No more secret schools where teachers recited lessons from memory. No more children playing quietly in courtyards, making toys from wire, drawing pictures in the dirt. Just silence. The kind of silence that rings louder than any scream. The silence of absence so complete it becomes presence. The silence of a world where children used to be. But here's what they didn't account for. The Nazis, with their meticulous plans, their efficient systems, their industrial approach to murder. They couldn't destroy the words. They could burn the buildings, liquidate the ghetto, murder everyone who lived there. They could erase names from registries, empty neighborhoods, pretend the people had never existed. But words, once written, have their own life. They hide in unexpected places. They survive in metal cabinets buried in rubble. They wait, patient and stubborn, for someone to find them. The children vanished. But listen, can you hear it? The rustle of 47 envelopes being opened after decades of silence. The whisper of paper that shouldn't have survived. The voice of a girl describing a butterfly she never finished seeing. The voice of a boy who wanted to build bridges. The voice of a child asking if God can see through walls. The silence tried to be complete, but it failed. Because we're hearing them now. We're reading their words. We're saying their names. Hania, Merrick, Lilka, Simon, Miriam. They're not gone. Not entirely. Not as long as someone is listening. Not as long as the letters remain. The letters slept in darkness for years. While Europe rebuilt itself from ruins, while survivors scattered across continents trying to piece together shattered lives, while the world tried, and largely failed, to comprehend what had happened, 47 sealed envelopes lay buried beneath rubble in Warsaw, waiting. Kazimierz Nowak, the postman who first found them in 1945, had brought them to the Jewish Historical Institute that autumn. But Poland in 1945 was chaos. The institute itself was barely functioning, operating out of damaged buildings, with limited resources, overwhelmed by the impossible task of documenting an atrocity so vast it defied documentation. The letters were logged, numbered, placed in a wooden crate with hundreds of other documents. Then the crate was moved to a basement for safekeeping. Then moved again. In the confusion of post-war Poland, in the tide of documents and testimonies and evidence flooding in from every corner of the former occupation, 47 children's letters became one archive among thousands. And there they stayed. In a basement. In a crate. Sealed. Unread. Forgotten. It wasn't until 1953 that a young researcher named Dr. Helena Mandelbaum found them again. She was working on a comprehensive archive of ghetto testimonies, going through boxes that hadn't been properly cataloged. She opened the crate expecting administrative documents, perhaps ration cards or deportation lists, the bureaucratic remnants of genocide. Instead, she found envelopes. Small ones, addressed in children's handwriting. Helena later wrote about that moment. I opened the first letter with trembling hands. It was from a girl who wanted to know if her aunt still had roses in her garden. Just that, a question about roses. I sat on the floor of that basement and wept. I wept because the question was so innocent. I wept because I knew no one had ever answered her. I wept because I was holding words written by a child who had no idea she was writing her own memorial. The preservation effort began immediately, but it was painstaking work. Many of the letters were damaged, water-stained, torn. The ink faded to near illegibility. Some were written in Polish, others in Yiddish, a few in a mixture of both. The Yiddish letters required specialists, scholars who could read the old script, who understood the idioms and references. Each letter was carefully photographed, transcribed, translated. Helena assembled a team, historians, linguists, survivors who could provide context about ghetto life. They worked in a small office with inadequate lighting, wearing white gloves to handle the fragile paper, treating each envelope like the sacred artifact it was. The biggest challenge was identification. Most of the letters were signed only with first names, sometimes just initials. Your loving nephew, Merrick. Your cousin, Hania. From S. The surnames, when included, were common: Goldberg, Weinberg, Levy, Cohen. And the addresses they were sent from no longer existed. The buildings had been destroyed. The streets had been renamed or erased entirely. Helena's team began the heartbreaking work of trying to find someone, anyone, who might recognize these children. They published excerpts in survivor newsletters, in Jewish newspapers across Europe and America. They reached out to organizations helping displaced persons, to records offices trying to reunify families. They created a registry, seeking information about the following children who lived in the Warsaw Ghetto. The responses came slowly. A letter from New York. Hania might be my niece. My brother lived on Noah Lipke Street. He had a daughter named Hania, who would have been 9 in 1941. I never heard from them after the occupation began. Could it be her? A telegram from Tel Aviv. Merrick Weinberg was my cousin's son. Brilliant boy. Loved mathematics. If you have his letters, please, I need to know what happened to him. But most of the inquiries led nowhere. Entire families had been erased. The aunts and uncles and grandparents these letters were addressed to, most of them were dead too. The Holocaust hadn't just killed individuals. It had destroyed the networks that would have remembered them. One survivor, an elderly woman named Ruth Kaplan, traveled from Paris to Warsaw when she learned about the letters. She came to the institute and asked to see them all. Helena led her to the archive room, and Ruth read each one slowly, carefully, her lips moving silently as she absorbed the words. When she finished, she looked up with tears streaming down her face. I don't recognize any specific names, she said, but I recognize all of them. These could be my neighbor's children, my students. I was a teacher there. These could be any of the children I knew. They all sound like this. Hopeful even when there was no hope. Trying to be brave even when they were terrified. They all sound like the children I couldn't save. In 1961, the letters were transferred to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center. By then, they'd been fully restored, documented, contextualized. Helena Mandelbaum accompanied them personally, carrying the crate on the flight like she was transporting souls. At Yad Vashem, they were placed in a climate-controlled vault designed to preserve them for centuries. Each letter was enclosed in acid-free folders, protected from light and humidity and the deterioration of time. They were digitized, so researchers could study them without handling the originals. Translations were made into Hebrew, English, French, German, so these children's words could be heard in languages they never knew, by people in futures they never saw. The letters became part of something larger, a wall of testimony, a mountain of evidence that insists. This happened, these people lived, their voices matter. Over the decades, a handful of identifications were confirmed. DNA evidence, cross-referenced survivor testimonies, old photographs. Slowly, cautiously, researchers were able to attach surnames to some of the children. To confirm that yes, Hania Lieberman lived on Noah Lipke Street. Yes, Merrick Weinberg was 11 in 1942. Yes, Lilka Rosenfeld wanted to be a writer. Small victories in an ocean of loss. But most of the children remain anonymous. We have their first names, their words, their personalities captured in ink. But we don't know their full names, who their parents were, where exactly they lived, how exactly they died. They exist in a strange limbo. More than statistics, less than fully known. Perhaps that's fitting. Perhaps they represent all the children whose names we'll never know. All the letters that were never found. All the voices that were silenced before they could even write their stories down. Today, the letters are among the most visited items in Yad Vashem's archives. School groups come to see them. Survivors' grandchildren come to see them. People from around the world come to stand before the glass cases and read the translations mounted beside each letter. They come to bear witness, to remember, to ensure that these children, who were supposed to be forgotten, are instead immortalized. There's a room dedicated to them, softly lit, the walls lined with enlarged photographs of the original letters. You can see Hania's careful handwriting, the flowers she drew in the margins. You can see where Marek's calculations crowded the edges of the page. You can see the letter from the girl called S, ending mid-sentence. The most beautiful thing I've seen in. People stand in that room and weep. They weep for children they never knew, for words written before they were born, for lives that were destroyed before these lives could begin. But they also come away with something else. Not just grief, but connection. Because these letters prove something essential. That even in humanity's darkest hour, even in a place designed to strip away every shred of dignity and identity, children remained children. They dreamed. They hoped. They loved. They noticed butterflies and dandelions. They asked questions and made jokes and imagined futures. They were human, undeniably and irrevocably human, and no amount of dehumanization could erase that. Helena Mandelbaum spent the rest of her career studying Holocaust testimonies. She published books, gave lectures, trained new generations of researchers. But she always said the 47 letters were her most important work. I didn't discover them, she'd insist. They discovered me. They chose to survive, and I was just fortunate enough to be the one who found them. My job wasn't preservation. These words preserved themselves. My job was simply to listen, to make sure others would listen too. Helena died in 2003, at the age of 82. At her funeral, someone read from one of the letters. Lilka's words about wanting to sit in a cafe and talk about beautiful, boring, normal things. That's what Helena gave them, the eulogist said. She gave them what they asked for. She listened to their normal things. She treated them not as victims, not as symbols, but as children who had something to say, who deserved to be heard. The letters remain at Yad Vashem, protected and preserved, waiting for the next person who needs to hear them. They are memory made tangible, legacy made real, proof that words can outlast walls, that voices can echo across decades, that love and hope and humanity can survive even in places built to destroy them. 47 children wrote letters they believed might reach someone. They were right. The letters reached us. All of us. And now it's our responsibility, not just to remember them, but to ensure others remember too. To keep their voices alive. To keep saying their names. To keep opening those envelopes and reading those words and understanding what they mean. That children once lived. That they mattered. That they still matter. That their words, against all odds, against all the machinery of genocide, against silence itself, their words survived. And so, in a way, did they. There's a school in Tel Aviv where every year, on Holocaust Remembrance Day, 15-year-olds stand in front of their classmates and read from the 47 letters. They don't perform them. They don't dramatize. They simply read, haltingly sometimes, their voices cracking, struggling to get through sentences that children their own age wrote 80 years ago. A girl named Maya reads Hania's letter about the dandelion. When she reaches the part about visiting it every day, about making it her friend, Maya stops. She looks up at her classmates, and you can see her trying to imagine it, being 9 years old and so starved for beauty that a weed between two stones becomes your companion. I can't. She starts, then stops, takes a breath, continues reading. A boy named David reads Marek's calculations about the wall. When he gets to the part where Marek says, "That's a lot of bricks to keep people in," David's voice hardens slightly. He's doing math too, calculating how many bricks it would take to imprison his own city, his own school, his own family. These modern children understand something profound. They're not reading history. They're reading contemporaries. Children separated from them only by time, not by humanity. The letters have been incorporated into Holocaust education programs worldwide. In Germany, students read them as part of their curriculum, confronting directly what their nation did, hearing the voices of those who were destroyed. In Poland, they're read at memorial sites, at the ruins of the ghettos, in places where the children who wrote them once walked. In America, England, France, Australia, in classrooms across the globe, teachers open with these letters because they do something statistics cannot. Numbers tell you 6 million Jews were murdered, 1.5 million of them children. But numbers create distance. Numbers can be abstract. A letter from Lilka about wanting to sit in a cafe is not abstract. A letter from Simon practicing to fly every night in his dreams is not abstract. A letter from Miriam asking if God can see through walls, that reaches across 80 years and grabs you by the heart and refuses to let go. A teacher in London named Sarah Mitchell told me, hypothetically, as these stories often go, about using the letters in her Year 10 history class. She had students read them, then asked, "What would you write? If you could only send one letter, knowing it might be your last, what would you say?" The classroom fell silent. These were teenagers who complained about homework, who texted constantly, who thought they had problems. Suddenly those problems felt very small. One student wrote to his grandmother about her cooking. Another wrote to a friend about a football match they'd watched together. A girl wrote to her little sister about how annoying she was, and how much she'd missed that annoyance. They wrote about the ordinary, Sarah said, just like the ghetto children did. And I think that's when it hit them, that these weren't victims or symbols. These were people who loved ordinary things. People exactly like them. At Yad Vashem, visitors can participate in something called reading the names. During Holocaust remembrance ceremonies, volunteers read aloud the names of victims. All day, all night, continuously. It takes days to read even a fraction of the names. The 47 letter writers are always included, even the ones whose surnames were never confirmed. Volunteers read. Hania, 9 years old, wrote about dandelions and beauty. Marek, 11 years old, wanted to build bridges. Lilka, 13 years old, dreamed of becoming a writer. It's a small thing, speaking a name aloud. But it's also everything. It's the opposite of what the Nazis intended. They wanted these children to vanish completely. No names, no stories, no memory. Instead, their names echo through a memorial hall. Their words are read in dozens of languages. Their stories are taught to millions of students. They are remembered. Specifically, individually, personally remembered. There's something else the letters do, something unexpected. They inspire action. A group of students in Berlin read about Avram Kessler's secret post office and were so moved they created a project called Letters Against Silence, encouraging people to write to prisoners of conscience, to refugees, to anyone isolated and forgotten. If children in the ghetto believed letters mattered, their mission statement reads, then we believe it too. A girl in Chicago read Esther's letter about measuring her birthday bread and started volunteering at a food bank. I wanted to do something, she explained. I can't change what happened to them, but I can make sure kids today don't go hungry. That feels like honoring them. The letters don't just teach history. They teach empathy, responsibility, the urgency of witnessing injustice and refusing to be silent. Every year, more survivors pass away. The generation that can say, I was there, is disappearing. Soon there will be no living witnesses to the Holocaust, no one who can describe firsthand what it sounded like, smelled like, felt like. But the letters remain. They are primary sources that will outlast memory. When the last survivor is gone, these 47 envelopes will still exist, still sealed in their climate-controlled cases, still waiting to be read, still insisting that this happened. These children lived. Their voices matter. Researchers continue to study them, finding new insights, new connections. Genealogists keep searching for relatives, for anyone who might recognize a name or a detail. The work of remembering never ends. There's a moment that happens sometimes in that room at Yad Vashem, the room with the letters. Someone will be reading the displays, moving from letter to letter, and suddenly they'll stop. Their hand will go to their mouth. Their eyes will fill with tears, and they'll stand there, frozen, reading one particular letter over and over. Maybe it's because they lost family in the Holocaust. Maybe they recognize something of themselves in the writer. Maybe the words just pierce through in a way they weren't prepared for. Guards at the museum know to give these people space, to let them stand there as long as they need. Because something sacred is happening, a connection across impossible distance. A child from 1942 reaching a stranger in 2025 and making them feel something, understand something, remember something. That's what the children wanted. Not to be pitted, not to be turned into symbols, just to be heard. To have someone receive their words and acknowledge, I see you. I hear you. You mattered. So here we are, 8 decades later, doing exactly what they asked. We opened their letters. We read their words. We learned their names. We tried to understand their lives, their hopes, their fears, their dreams. They wanted someone to read their words. We just did. Somewhere in an archive, 47 envelopes rest in darkness, their purpose finally fulfilled. The children who wrote them are gone, murdered in places designed to erase them completely. But their voices survived. Their words survived. Their humanity survived. And now we carry them forward. In classrooms and memorial halls. In conversations and lessons. In the way we teach our children about history, about empathy, about the importance of bearing witness. Honey as dandelion still blooms in our imagination. Marek's bridges are still being built by engineers who learned from his words that connection matters more than division. Lilka became a writer after all, not in the way she hoped, but her words are read more widely than most published authors. Simon flies every time someone reads his letter and imagines a boy who practiced in his dreams. And Miriam, sweet, 7-year-old Miriam who asked if God could see through walls. Her question still echoes, still challenges us to think about faith and justice, and how we respond when walls go up around the vulnerable. The 47 letters from the ghetto are more than historical artifacts. Their voices insisting on their own existence. Their children refusing to be forgotten. They're proof that words, carefully preserved and honestly heard, can defeat even death itself. Not completely, not in the way we'd wish. The children are still gone, and that loss is permanent and unforgivable. But their voices remain. Listen, can you hear them? I want to tell you something important. I was here. I lived. I dreamed. I wrote these words so you would know. I was real. Remember me. There's a Jewish tradition called Yizkor, a memorial prayer that asks God to remember the departed. But it's not really about God's memory. It's about ours. It's about the living taking responsibility for keeping the dead present in the world. These 47 letters are our Yizkor. We may never know all their faces. No photographs survive for most of them. We can't tell you exactly what Hania looked like when she knelt beside her dandelion, or how Marek's brow furrowed when he was calculating the bricks in the wall. We don't know if Lilka had her mother's eyes, or if Simon's hands moved like wings when he described his dreams of flying. But we know their words. We know Hania saw beauty where others saw only weeds. We know Marek believed in bridges when the world was building walls. We know Lilka wanted to transform pain into something meaningful. We know Simon practiced hope every single night. We know Miriam asked the questions adults were too afraid to voice. And knowing their words, that's enough to keep them alive. Not physically. We can't undo what was done. We can't bring them back, give them the futures they deserved, the lives they should have lived. The injustice remains absolute and irreversible. But we can refuse to let them be forgotten. We can speak their names. We can read their letters. We can teach their stories. We can make sure that the silence the Nazis tried to impose is broken, again and again, by voices that insist on being heard. If this story has moved you, and I hope it has, there are things you can do. Visit a Holocaust memorial or museum if you can. Stand in those spaces where memory is preserved. Read the testimonies. Look at the photographs. Say the names aloud. Bear witness. If you can't visit in person, explore the digital archives. Yad Vashem, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. They've digitized thousands of documents, testimonies, photographs. You can read more letters, hear more voices, learn more names. Share these stories. Talk about them with your family, your friends, your children. Don't let Holocaust education be something that only happens in history class. Make it part of how we understand humanity, both its capacity for evil and its resilience in the face of that evil. And maybe, if you feel called to, write a letter yourself. Not to anyone in particular. Just write about what matters to you, what you love, what you hope for, what you want the future to know about who you are. Because that's what these children were doing. Leaving a record of their humanity, their individuality, their irreplaceable selves. You never know when your words might matter to someone, when they might survive longer than you expected, when they might reach across distance or time to touch someone who needs to hear them. The children in the ghetto didn't know their letters would be read 80 years later by millions of people. They just knew they had something to say, and they trusted that saying it mattered. They were right. Here's what I want you to remember. The Holocaust was not an inevitable tragedy. It was not a natural disaster or an act of God. It was a series of choices, thousands upon thousands of choices made by human beings. Choices to hate, choices to dehumanize, choices to look away, choices to participate, to enable, to remain silent. But choices can go the other way too. Every time we choose to remember instead of forget, to speak instead of staying silent, to see the humanity in others instead of reducing them to categories, we're making a choice that pushes back against what happened in those ghettos and camps. The children who wrote these letters made choices too. They chose to hope when despair was easier. They chose to find beauty in dandelions and butterflies. They chose to dream about cafes and airplanes and bridge building. They chose to write, to reach out, to believe that connection was possible even through walls. We honor them not just by remembering their deaths, but by learning from how they lived. Somewhere in Jerusalem, in a climate-controlled vault, 47 envelopes rest in the darkness. They fulfilled their purpose. They found readers. They told their stories. They insisted on their author's humanity and won. But in another sense, their work is never finished. Because memory isn't passive. It doesn't maintain itself. Every generation has to choose to remember, to bear witness, to carry the stories forward. That responsibility is ours now. The survivors are passing. The witnesses are fading. Soon there will be no one left who can say, I remember when. We'll have only the artifacts, the documents, the testimonies, including these 47 letters written by children who wanted someone, anyone, to know they existed. They existed. We know it now. We've read their words, learned their names, felt their hopes and fears echo across the decades. And now we make them a promise. We will not let you be forgotten. We will not let your voices fade into silence. We will tell your stories, about dandelions and butterflies, about bridges and airplanes, about questions that still don't have answers. We will remember that you were children, that you loved and dreamed and hoped, that you mattered individually, personally, specifically, not as statistics, not as symbols, as yourselves. Hania, Merrick, Lilka, Simon, Miriam, Esther, Yosef, Rachel, David, and all the others whose names we know or don't know, whose letters survived or didn't survive, whose voices reached us or were silenced too soon to even write their words down. We remember you. We hear you. We carry you forward. This is what it means to bear witness. Not just to acknowledge that something terrible happened, but to honor the individual lives that were destroyed, to refuse to let them be reduced to numbers, to insist that every single one of them, every child, every letter, every unfinished sentence, matters. The letters still speak. Can you hear them? They're asking us to listen, to remember, to care, to make different choices than the ones that led to their destruction. They're asking us to be the kind of world where walls come down instead of going up, where children can write letters and know they'll be delivered, where dandelions are just weeds, not precious friends, where hunger is unimaginable, not constant, where dreams of flying lead to careers, not just nightly practice sessions in the dark. They're asking us to build the future they deserved but never got to see. And I truly believe, that the best way to honor them is to try, to remember their words, to share their stories, to make sure their letters keep speaking to generation after generation, until every person who needs to hear them has had the chance. Thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness. Thank you for opening these letters with me, for spending time with these children, for letting their words matter to you. They wanted someone to read their words. We just did. And in doing so, we've made them immortal. The whisper of paper, an envelope being carefully returned to its archive. A child's voice, barely audible, reading one final line. I hope you get this. I hope you remember. I hope. Silence. But the kind of silence that's full, not empty. The kind of silence that holds voices, even when they've stopped speaking. The kind of silence that remembers. In memory of the children of the ghettos. Their words survived. May we never let them fade. Text overlay suggestion for end credits. I visit the dandelion every day. Hania, age 9. I want to build bridges, not walls. Merrick, age 11. Can we go to a cafe and talk about nothing important? Lilka, age 13. I practice flying every night. Simon, age 10. Is it okay to remember? Miriam, age 7. I made my birthday bread last 17 minutes. Esther, I think God is like the sky, always there, even when you can't see it. Simon, someone has to remember. Merrick, the most beautiful thing I've seen in 47 letters, 47 voices, forever remembered.